Moreira from WISeKey with the cybersecurity panel and the Internet of Things. Carlos?
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, everybody. This morning we had a session on cybersecurity and IoT, where described basically what we call the fourth industrial revolution, which was the subject of the World Economic Forum this year in Davos, portrayed as being one of the #1 priorities for many countries. And this was later reflected in media and also in many of the government discussions that are happening in Davos. Actually, I was at that time running a very interesting cybersecurity table where we invited Kevin Spacey, the actor, and he gave himself his own views on cybersecurity because he was one of the victims of the Sony attack. And he had a very interesting views on how cybersecurity was important not only for big institutions but also for the media and entertainment industry. So this afternoon we have a very interesting panel, and it's a panel that can walk through different aspects of the cybersecurity, not only from the technology, which was covered this morning, but also for what security means in terms of the financial sector with Lina. Elena was actually also in the World Economic Forum before. Now she's in Barclays Bank and very active internationally, creating the awareness on cybersecurity and trust are important elements for running financial institutions. Then we're going to be also discussing with Jimmy on everything related to the cybersecurity practices, how cybersecurity is important for board of directors in corporations, how insurance companies are now looking at cybersecurity as one of the elements required for every serious company to adopt. And that discussion will bring us into the specifics on the practices. And then we're going to have David on privacy and data protection practices. We're going to work through him also on some important issues on data privacy, interrelation. Should we share cybersecurity information that we have in the companies with other companies? Is that something we should be doing or not? And later with Michael Miller, we're going to be discussing more profound issues on cybersecurity that maybe some of them were not at the beginning obvious for audiences which are not highly specialized, but we will develop them in a way then you will come with a very concrete idea on how cybersecurity relates to the infrastructure itself, the trust issues, the cryptographic issues, and areas like that. So maybe just to start the debate, and again, the way I normally like those roundtable is to be very open, and I'm on yourself also. If you have any questions that you think other panelists needs to reflect or to answer, you're most free to do it. So starting with Lina, suddenly out of the blue, banks start to invest in blockchain. I mean, and now Barclays is one of the leading ones, and you have now financial institution talking about trust. I mean, I come from Switzerland where basically we moved from trusting banks to the level of God to not trusting bank at all anymore. So why so important cybersecurity for banks, and why banks are investing so much now in areas related to next generation technologies such as blockchain?
Sure. Thank you, Carlos. So last year, Barclays has marked its 325th anniversary, and we often joke that we became older than the United States. So I think as an organization, we basically had two choices: whether we're going to be disrupted or whether we're going to try to embrace this disruption. And we chose to try to embrace this disruption. Right now, and of course financial services is one of the most competitive industries out there. We see that for instance in London, over 40% of the workforce is engaged in financial services and related industries. And at the same time, you also see, of course, that as we go online and as more and more people connect to the internet and expect their services to be available always online, 24/7, be convenient and fast, they also expect that those services are secure. And we realized that now security also became such a big part of what a bank or a financial institution sells. So basically it becomes like a part of a product, because if customers don't trust your product, they don't bank with you. It's very hard to keep, retain, and acquire those customers. So now for us, building this trust basically means four things. First, we want to enable security. And there's already a lot of data that shows that if customers don't think that your products are secure, they're very easy to be persuaded to switch to a competitor. So now security becomes a competitive advantage for banks and for financial services. The second is privacy. So if customers work with you, they expect that you secure their data properly. And if you don't, it's again a huge competitive disadvantage, and customers are very quick to leave. The third is convenience. You can of course, you can no longer build 100% security, but if you build cumbersome, slow products, also no one wants to use them. And so we want to make sure that convenience and user experience is also smooth in that process. And finally, it's speed to market. You cannot afford to take years, to build and roll out new products, because the digital life is very, very fast, and customers expect you to keep up with that. And they expect you to deliver personalized, highly secure, good services, and also do it quickly. Otherwise, again, they get frustrated. So I think those 4 components is what trust means for us. And the only way to retain the customers is through innovation. Because without innovation, it's just hard to maintain your position in the market. And I think those 4 components, coupled with innovation and all the new solutions like blockchain, are part of that strategy that we're trying to roll out.
And even using social media to attract new customers. Basically, the presence of bank lately on social media is very innovative. I will say this is one of the sectors that is innovating very, very fast on social media. So that's great. Thank you very much. And Jimmy, in terms of the I was in Washington at the Financial Times Cybersecurity Roundtable, and the main focus was how can we bring cybersecurity to the board of companies. Why still, despite the threats, despite the fact that everybody's getting hacked, or maybe it has been already hacked, boards are still very naive in terms of cybersecurity. So from your experience, what has improved in the last years, and what needs to be improved further?
Well, I think one of the things we're seeing improve is just awareness.
Okay.
Previously, I think it was not something that was top of mind for boards. And now, there's a lot of organizations that are pretty far behind others, but those that are really progressive and boards really understanding what are the right questions to ask. I think it's insufficient to just do, compliance is necessary but insufficient. You can't just say, are we good to go? Did you check the box and move on? You have to, that's not security. And they have to be educated whether there's actually an expert on the board or not. They need to be educated. In fact, there was some proposed legislation a few months ago that will never actually see the light of day as a law, but it's actually brought to light the fact that boards do need to wake up and think about this. It's not a threat that's going away anytime soon, and so they need to incorporate it into their overall risk framework.
But one of the things, and we do help a lot of banks and organizations to create a learning warning system inside the organization if a threat has happened or a breach has happened. Because you say about reporting. Reporting implies that you need to know what to report to be very accurate, because cybersecurity is very vast.
Yeah.
And
I actually meant reporting relationships.
Yeah.
That's because sometimes the CISO reports to the CIO.
Yeah.
But there's an inherent tension there, right? Because the infrastructure wants to make the infrastructure folks want to make things last as long as they can.
Sure.
From a cost perspective, but then the information security officers, they need not only talent, but they need the right sort of tools, so there's natural tension.
Correct.
So reporting structures can vary as well. But then of course you're speaking about requirements for reporting when you do it. I'm sure my esteemed colleague here can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, exchange of data,
Yeah.
So that's great. So let's move on I will call it the cooperation between institutions to exchange data and create such an early warning system. Well, I have been working lately after the Paris attacks, and we have been working with some police in Europe to trying to figure out why Europe is so inefficient in tracking the issues, the problem, the terrorism. And this is because we don't share data. French are having their own data, German, Swiss, and we are unable to share data. And if we had shared data with the analytics capability that we have, we could have been preventing many of those issues and basically being in a situation where we can bring intelligence down to the level of the data. What is your views on that, on cooperation, on sharing data? Is that still redundancy to do that, or is something that is becoming now more fluid?
Well, sharing data for the purpose of enhancing cybersecurity is really one of the foundational principles that the United States government has been trying to promote to increase the level of security. So some examples of that: the president in February of 2015 held a White House cybersecurity summit at Stanford University, and he issued an executive order on information sharing and analysis organizations, which are meant to be private sector for the most part, although they can be public sector organizations in the sense that they may include municipalities and other parts of the government. And they can be formed along a number of different lines, regional, industry, etc. And the idea is that if companies share information about cybersecurity threats, that will shorten the effective lifespan of that threat and the damage it can do, because instead of being able to be used again down the block, being able to be used again with other companies, they will share the threat indicators and defensive measures that can be taken and improve the ability to detect and defend against cyber threats. That has been amplified by legislation that was passed in December of 2015 by the United States Congress, and that's called CISA, is the way it's referred to, Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act. And the idea there was to incentivize participation by companies and to foster more real-time sharing. The Congress provided liability protection to businesses who share on a near real-time basis through a specialized portal at the Department of Homeland Security, even if they mistakenly may include some private information as part of that, provided they didn't know at the time of sharing they were doing that. There are procedures for them to scrub it and avoid that. But the idea is that by sharing information, we can make everybody safer from a cybersecurity angle. Now, that's not a silver bullet. Sharing information isn't going to mean that the threats we face go away. It isn't going to mean that determined nation-state adversaries don't succeed. But it is a way for businesses and others to enhance their cybersecurity and come together really as a community. And so that's why there's antitrust protection for sharing this as part of the CISA legislation that passed and the like, to try to reassure companies that they can do this effectively.
So actually, one of the elements that we had different discussion in the United States about the difference what we are doing, for instance, in Europe versus the United States, is the concept of identity. You know, sharing information. I personally don't mind people to have information about me, but without necessarily disclosing that it's me. This means your PII, personally identifiable information, which is encrypted, and I don't want to share that with anybody. But I don't want people to know what I'm doing or what kind of access I had. In the United States, you don't have yet a digital identity. In France, in Europe, in Germany, we have that for many, many years. Before, only plastic identities that we had in our pockets, and now with digital identities. Maybe a few words on that. I know that is the National Strategy for Trusted Identity in Cyberspace, which is a US legislation. Is that going to happen, or because we have been talking for 10 years about it? And why it doesn't happen? What are the block roads there?
Well, you know, there is a difference in approach between the United States and Europe to pick one jurisdiction. A lot of we hear more about this week as the various data protection commissioners in Europe are meeting and are going to take a position on the EU-US Privacy Shield, which was just negotiated to allow the exchange of data, the movement of data from Europe to the United States. That was necessary to address after the Schrems decision in Europe, which blew up the Privacy Shield, which was the primary means of transferring data from Europe to the United States, and providing assurances that there would be privacy protection for that. So the EU and the US are finding ways to work together, but it's also a relationship that has a certain amount of tension to it, especially in the post-Snowden world. And you know, it's developing very much so.
Thank you very much. So Mike, my experience when I was in the UN, I used to work a lot with the Army of the world, because armies, especially we are entering into, not anymore in cybersecurity, we have a sort of war going on. I mean, what happened in Ukraine just a few months ago is a sort of war attack. First ever time that one country managed to shut down the critical infrastructure in another country through the internet. Why is the Army, or in general the Navy Army, is not showing their leadership on cybersecurity? You know, the hack, the issue between Apple and the US government was solved by an Israeli company. You know, it was the Israeli company that managed to break the iPhone, and that company is actually one of the major contractors to the
Israel army. Why the army is not showing leadership on cybersecurity to create a defense mechanism for the country.
Is that an army issue?
I'll
blame it all on the army.
ARPANET was army, encryption was army.
Well, I would tell you that first and foremost, it's because our government moves with such alacrity and speed. That's a joke. But I think that this ecosystem, this identity ecosystem that needs to be created, and exists in pockets right now, but is not ubiquitous across the internet, is perhaps one of the greatest challenges of this generation. Quite frankly, of the people in this room. Because if we cannot get this right now, I'm fascinated, Elena was exactly right. This is about trust, isn't it? This is about, can we trust the people that we're working with? Can we trust our expectations? Can we trust that we're making a difference by doing the various things that our companies do, that in this case, the government needs to do, and needs to do quickly? That's one of my favorite books, by the way. Stephen Covey's son, Stephen Covey, wrote about the speed of trust, and it's a simple yet elegant thought about how much more efficient, how much more effective we are when we trust the people that we're dealing with. So this identity ecosystem, which does not fully exist yet, causes us to hesitate, causes us to question, okay, so is this really who I think I'm talking to? Is this data real? We talked about the transparency of China this morning, and so you can say, well, we've got all this great growth, or we don't, depending upon whether you trust the numbers. By trade, I was a carrier pilot, I would say in my early adulthood, but anybody who knows carrier pilots knows that you're not really an adult when you're flying off of carriers. But the point would be, we had a challenge. It was a simple challenge. We had tools that were getting loose in airplanes, and as the airplanes became more and more sophisticated, more complicated, we couldn't account for everything. We didn't know where it all went. And the last thing you want to do is find this hammer while you're upside down at 20,000 feet inside the cockpit. And so what we did was we created strong controls. We had a centralized authority. We built these certifying folks that would go through and ensure that not only was the place that was issuing the tools, but the toolboxes themselves, everything was color-coded, all that sort of business. And in the end, we eliminated or reduced our risk to a very, very low factor. So what does that have to do with the Internet of Things? Well, in point of fact, this is about a certificate of trust, roots. And of course, as you well know, Carlos, there's, the certification authorities are actually held in a very, very small sector. Basically in the United States, about 90% of them are controlled or issued by 4 companies. So if you have the correct root of trust, and then you can, so that particular form, the software that's written is secure, then you have the ability to check, all right, was the tool issued? Then do we know where the tool is, and is the jet then safe to be released? If you can follow that metaphor, where we are today, I think, is that we have these roots of trust. They're not universally accepted nor adopted yet, but they're there, and we need to adopt them now, bake them into the things that are being built, such that as this advances, and it's advancing so quickly, that these are decisions that need to be made not in the distant future. This is stuff that needs to be done in the next few months, such that we can build an Internet of Things that has, for example, as you have spoken so eloquently about on numerous occasions, WISeKey's ability to authenticate, whether it's a watch or it's a MasterCard or it's in our case, we want to make sure that our airplanes are not communicated with by somebody else. If you can build that root of trust, you're going to eliminate or minimize. You probably never fully eliminate it, but you minimize that opportunity for the hammer to show up when you're inverted at 20,000 feet. So I think that everybody talks.
It was embedded. They didn't have an identity layer. The internet doesn't know who you are. Actually, this picture, the dog is a dog on the internet, because the internet doesn't know who you are. The identity was never thought at the origin of the internet. So companies like WISeKey is one, Symantec is another, Entrust, they develop what you call root of trust, which are algorithms that allows you vertically to issue a trust hierarchy. So you create a cryptography at the top level, and then you start to develop a chain of trust. So you will, I for instance, will entrust Barclay to issue identity to Barclay users. And that chain of trust is mathematically embedded into the internet. So because now we are connecting 50 billion objects, those root of trust are required to make each object its own identity. You will never imagine an object to be able to send data to another object without authenticating themselves. The fridge will not be a fridge, the TV will not be a TV. So identification of objects is something that needs to happen, and I think that will accelerate the discussion.
Sure, Carlos. I will absolutely agree on trust, and I think for banks, it now becomes especially important because they pretty much, and all financial institutions, they pretty much give a copy of everything they have to their lawyers, accountants, tax advisors. So basically, it's not only about trust and security of your own organization, but it's what we call third and fourth party security. And how do you actually enable that? And then it becomes a much harder problem. What we saw is that very often before companies have any kind of contracts with their suppliers, they just say, do you have a basic information security or protection problem? And you click tick yes, and this therefore was perceived as if there's some kind of risk that can be mitigated by a control, which is a risk control issue. But it's really not, it's much more complicated. And when you go into this issue and ask them, okay, but how exactly are you securing our information? Who has access to it? What are you doing so that this information doesn't leak? That becomes a much more comprehensive issue. So I think, companies are now also trying to impose and create those rules, not only for themselves, but also for the ecosystem of partners that they work on. So this is a major change that we're seeing right now. And the second, you earlier asked about the boards. I think earlier there was an assumption that CEOs and boards, they care about one question: are we secure, yes or no? But I think again, exactly. This is changing because this is no longer a satisfactory answer. You have to explain why we're secure, what is the threat landscape, who is targeting us, what are we doing about this, how much money do we need to invest, how do we make those decisions, what controls do we need to build, are they still adequate, things like that. And this is exactly the questions that the board would like to know. It's no longer
It's also a liability issue. I think board of directors now have to cover also the liability aspect of not for providing the right security to their clients. One question on, sorry. Please.
How this all, we've just seen the Panama Papers.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to what you're talking about, how...
But everybody is, it's just what happened with FIFA. All the biggest scandals that you are facing